Gonzaga will host the top-ranked center in the 2026 recruiting class this February, and it sure looks like Mark Few is looking to load up the front court once again.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Monday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Ultimate College Football Head Coach. It's a brand new mobile game that is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. Use promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Begin your coaching legacy today. All right, folks, we got a jam-packed episode today. No mailbag for right now. If you did ask a question and it doesn't get covered in today's show, I will try to get to it later in the week. But as happened last week as well, we had a handful of updates around the program come through over the weekend. Wanted to make sure we got to all of them today. We're going to talk about Sam Funches, a four-star center in the 2026 recruiting class who was offered a scholarship by Gonzaga a long time ago. Now we know he has set a visit to Spokane. We'll talk about what that means. And then we're talking realignment in the second and third segments today. UConn and the Big 12 are having conversations. We're going to talk about where they're at in those conversations, what it means for them, what it means for Gonzaga. And then we're going to close out the show talking about if this isn't a good thing for Gonzaga and the Big 12, could it potentially be a good thing for Gonzaga in another capacity? We'll get to that to close out the show. But we start with more recruiting news for Gonzaga. We've talked a lot of recruiting lately. Nick Kamenia finally revealed his top five. Kingston Flemings has set up his top list, is also planning to come to Spokane to visit for Creighton in the Kennel. Isaiah Harwell's leaning in a different direction. We talked about all of that. But now, Mark Few's already turning his attention to 2026, the future recruiting class here. Sam Funches, four-star center in that 2026 class from Mississippi, is officially set to visit Gonzaga February 14th through 16th, Friday through Sunday in mid-February next year. The Zags will host Pepperdine on February 15th at the McCarthy Athletic Center. So Funches will be in the building to watch Gonzaga take on that Waves program. Funches has also set official visits to Cal and Ole Miss. Interestingly, much earlier in the season than he is visiting Gonzaga. He is visiting Cal on October 4th through October 6th. He is visiting Ole Miss on October 24th through October 26th. The week prior, he has an unofficial visit slated for Mississippi State. That'll be on October 19th. So we got a couple of visits in the month of October. He's going to be busy. He's going all the way out to Cal and Berkeley. Then he's staying in-state to visit Mississippi State and Ole Miss. And then he's got a few months during the season, and then he's going to come to Spokane February 14th, Valentine's Day. He'll be in the house, or I guess he'll be in Spokane. He'll be in the McCarthy Athletic Center the next day to watch the Zags take on the Waves. A little bit more about who Sam Funches is. 6'10" center from Madison, Mississippi, plays at Germantown High School, 21st ranked player in the 2026 class at this point by the 247 Sports composite rankings. 247 is a little lower on him individually. They have him 35th in the class, but while they have him as the third ranked center in the class, the composite rankings overall have Funches as the top ranked center in 2026. Overall positional or overall rankings matter, no doubt about it, but positional rankings matter too. Gonzaga is currently going after the top ranked center in the 2026 class. The best center that they can potentially land in that class is being pursued by Mark Few and the Bulldogs. That is significant. Whether 21st or 35th or 40th or whatever in the overall class, all that matters again to some extent, but this is a positional specific need for Gonzaga, and they are choosing to attempt to address that position by going after a player who is the top ranked at his position. And they are not alone. They are not alone. Obviously, Cal, Mississippi, and Mississippi State are all invested in him, as we saw by the upcoming official and unofficial visits. But he has offers from all sorts of fantastic college basketball programs. Alabama has an offer out to him. So does Auburn. So does Kansas State, Creighton, Indiana, Houston, and Michigan. That's not the whole list. That is just a selection of the list of programs who have made him an offer. And again, I've said this before, I will say it again. On3 does do their predictive rankings. They have a percentage of how likely certain players are to go to a specific program. When you are very close to a player making a commitment, i.e. Isaiah Harwell, who is now a heavy Houston lean and is making his announcement on September 12th, I think those percentages and those data points that they have matter a little bit more. We are a long ways away from Sam Funches making any kind of decision as a 2026 recruit. However, right now he's a pretty strong lean to Ole Miss. And that makes sense to me because he's from Mississippi. In-state programs always try to keep their high-level talent in-state when they can. Recruits often want to play for the local program. Not always, obviously, but many times they do. And I think the biggest factor here is that Chris Beard is a really, really good recruiter. He's very good at this part of his job. He's a very good X's and O's coach. He's a very good recruiter. Obviously, he's had some transgressions off the floor that have limited his kind of ability to grow within the game. But he is fantastic at recruiting talent, and he's a fantastic actual basketball coach. And so for Funches, the fit makes sense at Ole Miss. They're going to pursue him heavily. They got SEC money. They're going to toss it at him. That is a very obvious fit to me. Again, really early in the process. Really, really, really early in the process. But he also makes a lot of sense for Gonzaga as well. We're talking about a 2026 player, meaning his first season of college basketball, whether it's at Gonzaga or not, will be in the 2026-27 season. Ben Gregg, long gone by then. Graham Ike, as much as we joke about the multiple years of eligibility he still has remaining, he's not going to be here in 26-27. If Braden Huff is still around, he would be a redshirt senior, would be his fifth year of college or fifth year of being a college student, his fourth year of playing college basketball. Not saying he won't be around. He might be, but that would mean that Funches would be coming into his freshman season with Braden Huff as the redshirt senior. Ismaila Diani would be a junior. Again, that is assuming Ismaila Diani is still in the program. It's the same with Braden Huff. Who knows if either of those guys eventually develop into NBA caliber talent where they leave the program early. Obviously, they could transfer. Like there's a lot of factors. Trying to project a single player on Gonzaga's roster in 26-27 is kind of just futile at this point because of how much rosters turn over year. But what we know right now is that Graham Ike and Ben Gregg won't be there. Michael Ajayi won't be there either. We know that Braden Huff could be there as a senior. We know that Ismaila Diani could be there as a junior. So adding Huff as a freshman, adding Funches as a freshman makes a ton of sense because you'd have kind of the future of the program in terms of the front court kind of already kind of in the system. You could learn from Huff. You could learn from Diani. They'll have both been in the system for a couple of years at that point. In terms of who Sam Funches is, scouting reports on him right now are a little bit barren. He's very young. He's got a lot of development and growth to do. Case in point, he's listed at 7 foot at some places. Some places list him at 6'10". I believe On3 had him at 7 foot, 235 pounds, whereas 24/7 Sports has him at 6'10", 205 pounds. Either way, whichever one of those is correct, he's skinny. Not a lot of meat on those bones. Hasn't bothered Gonzaga in the past. Case in point, Chet Holmgren, but it is still the likely scenario here is a kid who's probably 16, 17, maybe, probably 15 or 16, being tall and skinny. He's probably just going to fill out. He's going to get stronger. He's going to get more physical. Whether that impacts his speed and his mobility and things like that, those are obviously factors that could impact his eventual recruiting when he's a little bit older, a little bit more developed, a little closer to being a college-age kid. But for right now, he is tall, he is lanky, he is mobile, he is a good shot blocker, and he has outside shooting ability. He has all the makings of a potential quote-unquote unicorn in college basketball. The three-point shooting, rim-protecting big man is what everybody wants. It's the Chet Holmgren. It's the Zvonimir Ivasic at Kentucky. That's what they wanted him to be. Now he's at Arkansas following Coach Cal. That's what they're hoping he becomes. You want bigs who can do both of those things. Funches, very early on as an early high schooler, has those potential abilities. And that's why Gonzaga and Alabama and Houston and Mississippi and Cal and everybody else is interested in this young man. He's the first known target for Gonzaga in the 2026 class. Again, they offered him way back in April. Now we know he's coming to campus. It's always a good sign. Anytime Mark Few can get a player on campus in Spokane, it is a promising sign. Having said that, we got really excited about Nick Kaminia and then waited literal years to even hear a top 5. So I will say this now. There is a very, very slim chance that we hear anything about Sam Funches for the next year. A year from now, I'd be surprised if we have a top 5 on Sam Funches. So just keep that in mind when thinking about recruiting. Maybe wouldn't be shocked. Maybe 9 months from now, I'd be surprised if we have a top 5 on Funches. So keep that in mind. Get excited. Young player, big man, potential really good fit in Mark Few's system. All those things are true, but there's a lot of time left before this thing gets resolved. All right, folks, moving on to finish our show with the same conversation about the rumors, not even rumors, the actual conversations happening between the UConn Huskies and the Big 12. They're in talks, and it feels familiar. Where they're at, how long they've been talking, what we've heard, what we haven't heard, it feels familiar. It happened about exactly 1 year ago to the Gonzaga Bulldogs. What it might mean for UConn, for the Big 12, and for Gonzaga, we're going to get to all of that in just a second. Hey, Locked On fans, I want to give you a moment to give you a heads up on a brand new mobile game that I think you're going to love, Ultimate College Football Head Coach. In this amazing simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. From recruiting players and hiring a coaching staff to overseeing training camps and handling scholarships, you control every crucial detail of your program. Will you be able to handle the pressure? Ultimate College Football Head Coach is completely free. It has no ads, and it's 100% playable offline. You can play on the go wherever you want. And of course, we have a special offer for our Locked On Zags listeners. Use promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate College Football Head Coach. Begin your coaching legacy today. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And folks, we're talking realignment. Specifically, we're talking about realignment conversations that are happening between the UConn Huskies and the Big 12. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that you would have heard about these before ESPN reported on it, before Yahoo Sports reported on it. If you listen to Locked On Big 12 podcast, Drake Toll had Mark Zanetto, the host of Locked On UConn on the podcast. They talked about this. They talked about how it was likely coming down the pipeline, how there was rumors that these meetings were happening. So folks, if you want to hear more about realignment rumors, more about what's going on in the Big 12, more about what's going on with the UConn Huskies, Drake Toll, host of Locked On Big 12, does a phenomenal job. Been on the show before. Mark Zanetto, Locked On UConn, both those shows are fantastic. But for those of you who did not listen or who are not caught up on the situation, the UConn athletic director and their board chair met with Big 12 athletic directors in Dallas last week. That is the thing that happened. There are articles written about what this means. There are articles saying UConn to the Big 12, ? There are conversations about how this might work, how the money's going to work, when the football team's going to get there, all this stuff. And we're going to talk about that. But in terms of the facts of what happened, UConn athletic director and the board chair met with Big 12 athletic directors in Dallas. That is what happened. There is a board call, which is planned for this upcoming week, with the Big 12 presidents to lay out the specifics. Meaning that for all of the rumors, for all of the conversation, for all of the discourse, the Big 12 presidents haven't even heard the plan. And I think that is a really important point to acknowledge when talking about this process. And I think it's important because as Gonzaga fans, we know how not far into the process that is. We got very excited last summer, literally almost exactly 1 year ago, because Brett Yormark was all about Gonzaga. He was all about adding a basketball-only school into the conference. And Brett Yormark wanted it, and Gonzaga wanted it, and that felt like, boom, we're moving towards it. It's going to happen next year, blah, 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 blah. And then it halted very suddenly. And I'm not saying necessarily that's going to happen in this case. But seeing UConn fans, some who are anti this move, some who are pro this move, seeing college basketball fans in general, Big East fans who are upset, Big 12 fans who are excited, whatever, we are very, very minimal way into this process. You can still see the train. It hasn't gotten that far out of the station at this point. In fact, a high-ranking Big 12 official told ESPN the specific word that he would use to describe the situation right now is, quote, premature. A longer quote from him says, there's a far distance between conversations and anything that would happen. The presidents haven't even seen the case yet. So do not be donning your UConn Big 12 shirts Do not be planning out what their schedule is going to look like. If you live in Big 12 country and you're like, oh, like, when could I go on a road trip to see UConn? None of that. We are a long ways away from those conversations. And it's kind of funny seeing it from the other side, knowing that it unfortunately stopped pretty suddenly for Gonzaga. And we don't know, again, whether that's going to happen in this situation or not, but we know that it could. And I think there's a lot of people who are maybe expecting that, oh, we've already gotten this far. So it's, they just got to sign the T or, dot the T's. You guys know the phrase. They got to do that. And then they'll vote and they'll say yes. And boom, UConn's in the Big 12. And it is not nearly that simple. The arguments that were used against Gonzaga, obviously there's more to it because UConn has back-to-back national championships, 2 more championships in the last 2 years than Gonzaga has ever won. It's a harsh reality, but it is a reality. It is true. And UConn also has football. Not good football, mind you, but football. That changes the equation. Potentially negatively in UConn's factor, by the way, but it does change the equation, whereas Gonzaga does not have that. But the main arguments that Big 12 ADs and presidents used against Gonzaga was that they're already doing a ton of realignment. 8 teams in the last 2 years joining the Big 12 conference, 6 total as they lose 2 in Texas and Oklahoma. But you bring in the 4 schools from last year in Houston, Cincinnati, Central Florida, and BYU. And then this past year, you bring in the 4 corner schools, Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado. That's 8 new brands, 8 new programs, 8 new localities that you bring into your conference in a very short period of time. And the presidents and ADs don't want to continue to do that. That's what they said as their anti-Gonzaga argument at the time. I don't see why that sentiment would be wildly changed. Some of the specifics on the details here, it sounds like the UConn football program wouldn't be coming into the Big 12 until 2031. So this would be a move to add them in every other sport outside of football for 5 years. Part of that is because it would be cheaper for the Big 12 presidents and athletic directors. They wouldn't have to lose as much money bringing in a new football program as they would just bringing in the rest of the sports and waiting to bring football in. It also gives UConn an opportunity to make their football program better because it is not good. The Big 12 is below the SEC and the Big 10 in terms of football talent, but top to bottom, the Big 12 is still better than UConn. From a football perspective, they would come in and be one of, if not the very worst team in the conference right away. And you give them 5 years to throw more NIL money at it, to know that they're about to get a bunch of money from the Big 12. They're going to be able to recruit a little bit better because they're going to be in Dallas, or they're going to be in Texas. They're going to be, playing games in different localities that might help them. So that makes sense to me. That concept makes sense. But again, it's just a concept. It's an idea that UConn is on board with, and it's an idea that some Big 12 leadership is on board with, and we have no idea how the presidents or athletic directors feel. What does it mean for Gonzaga? Well, so far, nothing. So far, nothing. Is it possible the Big 12 would try to add both Gonzaga and UConn? Yeah. Is it possible the Big 12 athletic directors, if they're willing to let UConn in, are also willing to let Gonzaga in to turn the conference into a all time zones, coast-to-coast basketball powerhouse conference? Yeah, it's possible. But also might not be. They might also be focused on UConn and not adding anybody else. They might say no to both. If I was a betting man right now, I would say that that's probably the most likely outcome, not permanently, but that this specific conversation right now doesn't ultimately lead to UConn or Gonzaga being in the Big 12. That would be my read. Second most likely is UConn, yes, Gonzaga, no. Third most likely in my mind is that they vote to accept UConn. They turn around and do a follow-up vote to accept Gonzaga to turn it into a big old basketball powerhouse. There's not any indication that Gonzaga and the Big 12 are engaged in any kind of talks right now. I want to make that very clear. There's not any indication that those conversations are happening. Again, doesn't mean that they're not. It just means that there's not any reporting indicating that that's what's going on. How incredible would it be? My goodness, these are the top 7 teams in the Big 12 if this were to happen. Gonzaga, UConn, Kansas, Baylor, Houston, Arizona, Iowa State. Many years, those 7 teams are all in the top 10. And you have them all in the top conference. Kansas State is finishing like 8th in the Big 12. TCU's barely top 10. West Virginia, BYU, list goes down, to the rest of the teams in that conference. It's insane how loaded and stacked and ridiculous the Big 12 would be if this were to happen. But again, the only rumors right now are about UConn. It doesn't mean Gonzaga is necessarily a part of those conversations. So what could that mean? What if the reality of UConn joining the Big 12, leaving the Big East, Gonzaga not getting an invitation to the Big 12? Would this be a catastrophic situation for Gonzaga, or could it open up the Bulldogs to potentially joining the Big East? We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, folks, let's talk about 5-hour energy, because just about every single day, right after lunch, I'm tired. It's that lull period in the afternoon. And if you're like me, good news, you're not alone. In fact, research shows that more than 70% of us hit a wall right after lunch. So let a 5-hour energy shot help you leap over that wall instead of crashing into it. I've been working on cutting sugar out as I get older, and so I love that 5-hour energy has zero sugar. Plus, it's got a convenient portable size and is the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5-hour energy website has flavors galore: watermelon, grape, tropical burst, berry, and more. Try them all. On the site, you even have the option to build your own 12-pack or 24-pack. You choose the flavors and it is delivered right to your door. So just go to 5hourenergy.com and get some 5-hour energy products today. You can even use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. Offer is only valid until September 30th on one order. It cannot be used with other promotions, and the code is not good on subscription orders. So folks, go to 5hourenergy.com today. All right, folks, closing out the show today, continuing our conversation about the big rumor/news over the weekend: UConn Big 12 back in talks, potentially about having the school leave the Big East again, something they seem to do with regularity, joining the Big 12 conference, becoming part of the football power conferences, bringing the football program along about a half decade later, but getting those basketball teams right into the Big 12 powerhouse. We talked about what it might mean for Gonzaga. We'll have more conversations about this. Certainly as this conversation develops with UConn and the Big 12, if it stalls out, we'll talk about that. If it doesn't stall out and continues to proceed and looks like it might happen, we'll talk about whether Gonzaga gets involved on the Big 12 side as well. But what I want to talk about now is the fact that the Big East, if they lose UConn after just signing a new media rights deal, which is pretty lucrative for a non-football conference, the Big East new media deal, pretty darn great. They have deals with Fox Sports. They have deals with Peacock. They have deals with NBC. Like, they have a lot of different irons in the fire. I was very impressed with the Big East's latest media rights deal. And losing UConn means they have the opportunity to add another school and kind of hopefully keep everything intact. Obviously, the media partners are not going to be thrilled about signing a big-time deal with the Big East and then losing their biggest brand in UConn. But if the Big East can turn around and say, well, guess what? Yeah, we're losing UConn, but we're adding Gonzaga, that might be enough to kind of move the needle and keep those media partners happy. While, of course, for Gonzaga, they're not going to do this unless they know the Big 12 is not an option. If the Big 12 says we're going to add UConn and we're also going to add Gonzaga, Gonzaga's probably going to wait it out and see what happens and make sure that that's a reality. But I could see a situation where, as much as UConn joining the Big 12 might feel like a bit of a slap in the face to Gonzaga, it might feel frustrating for the fan base. If you're out there and you're frustrated seeing these rumors, seeing this conversation, I get it. That's very understandable. I think it's unfair to try to compare ourselves to UConn. Gonzaga's got a lot of great things going for them. But again, we have not won back-to-back national championships on the men's side. And on the women's side, of course, UConn's women's basketball program is unbelievably elite. And so I understand why they would be the preferred team for the Big 12 right now. But again, the idea that UConn joining the Big 12 is catastrophic for Gonzaga, I would put that to bed. Because again, it could raise the likelihood of Gonzaga also joining the Big 12, which would be great. But it also makes Gonzaga a more appealing addition for the Big East. We know Val Ackerman, the commissioner of the Big East, is connected to Gonzaga. She has said positive things about Gonzaga in the past. She has indicated that they have open lines of communication between each other. She has indicated that Gonzaga institutionally is a good fit in the Big East, which is undeniably true. The Big East is chock full of Jesuit Catholic institutions that don't have football that are great at basketball. That is tailor-made for Gonzaga. Gonzaga has every single one of those things. They are a perfect fit on paper in the Big East Conference. No debate. Never been a debate on that in that area. Problem is travel, and it's a huge problem, and it is a borderline it's a potential hurdle that may not be able to be overcome. That's the question. Both sides need to be pretty desperate in order to overcome that hurdle and make it work. A situation where the Big 12 finalizes their realignment by adding UConn. And I say it that way because, I mean, they're adding UConn and they're saying we're done after this. that situation could be enough of a desperation for both Gonzaga, who is right now kind of hoping that some combination, some power conference will invite them in. They're not necessarily super specific on who. But if the Big 12 is no longer interested in Gonzaga, their options are limited. If the Big East loses UConn, they're going to have to make a move. They may not feel like they have to, but I think that they're going to start to feel some urgency. And that urgency on the side of the Big East, combined with the urgency for Gonzaga, that might be enough for these two sides to say, okay, let's hammer this thing out. And again, that is also with Gonzaga now knowing the media rights deal that they would be stepping into. Previously, any conversations that were had would have been difficult because the Big East would be saying, yeah, we're negotiating our new deal. And maybe we're trying to recruit you because we want you in the picture so that we can negotiate said deal. But then Gonzaga's having to join a conference without knowing the media deal. Now, they would have done it because they would have expected that it would have been better than what they're getting in the WCC. But now they know the figures. That's a big difference, too. They know what they'd be getting themselves into. And they would know the amount of money that's coming into the program by joining the Big East, which is important because they also need to be able to calculate how much money are they losing by added travel costs. Because every team in the Big East is going to lose some money with travel costs if they have to come to Spokane. And again, we're talking about being a full member institution in the Big East, not just men's and women's basketball. We're talking baseball, we're talking soccer, we're talking volleyball, we're talking rowing, we're talking tennis, we're talking all the Olympic sports. Every team in the Big East is going to have some added expenditure for a trip or two to come out to Spokane. But Gonzaga, their travel is astronomically higher because every single conference game is at least 1,100 miles away. Every single one of them. The closest geographic team to Spokane, Washington in the Big East is Creighton in Omaha, Nebraska, 1,142 miles away. They are one of just two teams that are within 1,500 miles. That's a little bit cheating. Marquette's 1,457, DePaul is 1,501. So basically 1,500 miles away. After that, Butler's 1,637, Xavier's 1,739. Those are the only five schools in the conference that are less than 2,000 miles away from Gonzaga. 2,000 miles. Georgetown, Nova, Seton Hall, St. John's, Providence. All of them are over 2,000 miles away. That is insanely far. Again, you're sending your baseball team to a 3-game series at Seton Hall. That's hard. That's a hard ask. You're sending your soccer program out there, your tennis teams. That's hard. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of expenditure. It's a lot of air miles. It's a lot of environmental impact. There's a lot of different factors that go into that. I think that this makes a lot of sense. And I think that the desperation, for lack of a better word, on both sides in a scenario where the Big 12 is adding UConn and is not also looking to add Gonzaga. I think in that situation, Gonzaga's faced with, okay, the Big 12 saying no. We could wait and see if they change their mind, which is possible, but is not a fun position to be in if you're Gonzaga. We could wait and see whatever the heck's going to happen with the Pac-2 and the Mountain West and whether they, are going to kind of form a new power-ish conference with like San Diego State and Boise State and some of those teams. We could see if the ACC is going to crumble. There's still litigation going on with Florida State and the ACC. If they can get out, if Clemson can get out, does that whole thing fall apart? What does that do to this conversation? Does Stanford and Cal come back? Is SMU a player? They can wait for all that. Or they could just, if the Big East says, hey, yeah, we're ready. Let's do this. Let's get back to 11. Let's get another team in here. I think if you're Gonzaga, you say, yep, let's do it. Let's join the conference that fits us the most aesthetically, institutionally, just overall. And sure, we're going to spend a lot of time on planes. And that's not great. It's not super ideal. But it is better than waiting to hope the Big 12 once again reopens this conversation, which if it doesn't, I'm not sure how confident they're going to feel still waiting for that. We're waiting to see if the Pac-12 and the Mountain West can form some conference that's maybe slightly better than the WCC. I don't think that's a super fun, appealing option either. I think the best scenario is them hopping into the Big East. If they get invited, we don't know that the Big East is going to invite them. It just feels like I don't want to say likely, but a obvious outcome, an outcome that would make sense for them to do based on how they would be feeling after losing UConn. We're going to have a lot more conversations about this, folks, a lot more. probably later this week, if not certainly in the coming weeks, as we get more details on what's going on between UConn and the Big 12. If it seems like it's progressing, if there is any rumor that comes out about the Big East's potential plans about losing UConn, if Gonzaga gets involved in those conversations and it starts getting reported, we'll certainly have more on that. But definitely stay tuned here. This story is far from over for Gonzaga and conference realignment. That is going to wrap it up for me today, though, folks. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Thank you to those of you who have joined the Discord channel. If you have not done so yet, free to join. Link in the show notes, audio and video platforms coming out. We're talking hoops, Gonzaga, all sorts of fun conversations all the dang time in that channel. Thanks again, folks, for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.